I think about the future all the time. When I imagine it beautiful, it's one in which everyone in it is able to feel their wholeness, feel the beauty of connection, feel their freedom, feel like there's nothing of themselves that they have to tuck away or hide because it's unacceptable to the rest of the world. What each of us practices at the scale of our individual lives is what is then possible for us at a large scale. I have it on my wall. I'm a microcosm of all the possible liberation, justice, pleasure, and honesty in the universe, and I act accordingly.
Welcome, welcome. Back in the summer, I heard the words Dismantling New Age Spirituality come in a wave of creative inspiration and knew that this needed to be the theme of our next offering. I am delighted to share with you our latest course, From Me to We. This has been lovingly worked on and curated by myself, Helly Cameron, and Azadeh Momen Ghalibaf over the past 6 months, with the support of Charlie Livingston on making it a reality. The learning journey is 6 weeks from May the 2nd till June the 9th. It's made up of 6 speaker sessions, 6 embodiment sessions, and 6 discussion salons. We wanted to make sure that there was space for not only the speakers to explore the questions, but also an embodied practice so that we could really feel the answers arise in our own bodies and have space to discuss in groups and create community around these themes. Of course, it's optional. So if you just feel called to join the speaker sessions or just the embodiment pieces or watch some of them later, refer back to some of it, then that's also all good. We know that people learn in different styles and ways. And so we wanted to make this a really full offering. And we've also made it affordable. So it's not like a crazy huge price tag, even though you're getting so much wisdom and experience. And we're going on this journey together. As the pandemic has changed us in ways that we are just comprehending, several living questions are: how can we live our values in a more meaningful way? How do we move from the paradigm of individual spirituality to something that feels more aligned with the story of interbeing? How do we have a relationship with the sacred that allows us to show up in an engaged way, recognizing that we're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat? We are living in a crisis of spirit and separation from our true nature, each other, and this beautiful planet. Navigating a spiritual path within late-stage capitalism is challenging for all of us, as many of us have moved away from organized religion into a hybrid of different cultures and practices. Whilst well-being has become an industry, we feel the damage that New Age spirituality has caused. It has distorted us from an engaged and embodied approach to collective healing and liberation, in many cases fostering great separation, individualism, and escapism, and doing little to dismantle and transform the systems of power and separation that drive so much suffering in our world. Many of us feel we have become a product of this time and these systems, with a focus on individual success and external comparison, fueling these very crises rather than seeking to heal their shared roots. Despite good intentions, we find ourselves navigating the complexities of these times rather clumsily and being part of the problem. We now also exist within cancel culture, where questioning the dominant narrative can lead to being outcast and deplatformed. It's a challenging time we live in. If you are feeling called to deepen your understanding of this time, unravel some outdated patterns, and explore how you can grow and serve in your community, All That We Are invites you to join us on this living inquiry into how we move from me to we. This is a collective journey to transmute and heal from the hyper-individualized and capitalist shadows that too often fuel isolation, inadequacy, and polarity. Our deepest intention is to create a space to discover and embody a spirituality of belonging, wholeness, and action, to live a we that is more inclusive and expansive in these divided times and in deeper relation with the more than human world. Our starting point is not with all the answers. We don't offer you experts or gurus. We have good questions and a willingness to sit with the uncertainty this great turning asks of us. We will bow at the altar of emergence and hold space for what longs to be birthed through us as we remember all that we are. We have gathered a collective of curious souls for this inquiry, in both the facilitators and each of you taking part. Together, we can explore what it means to be human at this time and how to show up more powerfully as we go on this 6-week learning journey. From Me to We is the first experience in our new series, Dismantling New Age Spirituality, which comes as we let go of the future is beautiful to embrace all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. And this quote from Bell Hooks, the late great Bell Hooks, from her book All About Love, New Visions, really summarizes why we need this right now. She says, "Much as I enjoy popular New Age commentary on love, I'm often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community. Packaged as a commodity, spirituality becomes no different from an exercise program. While it may leave the consumer feeling better about his or her life, its power to enhance our communion with ourselves and others in a sustained way is inhibited." For each of the 6 weeks of the learning journey, we have 6 different themes, and we have questions that we are going to be exploring during these weeks. For week 1, the sessions are based on the theme of dismantling New Age spirituality, where we will explore the questions: what is New Age spirituality and why does it need dismantling? How have our spiritual lives been co-opted by systems of power and separation, including capitalism, colonization, anthropocentrism, patriarchy, and hyper-individualism? In week 2, the theme is the expanded we, and the questions are: what happens when we move beyond polarity and anthropocentrism into a larger sense of we? How do we embrace both the more than human world and those who have different beliefs to us in our understanding of who we are? Week 3 is called We Are All Entangled. How can we shift our understanding of karma from an individual to a collective, embodied inquiry and practice? How can collective karma actually invite more space for different belief systems and diversity on the path? Week 4 is collective Dharma. How do we deepen our understanding of Dharma from an individual soul focus to a collective inquiry that honors and celebrates both our diversity and interconnectedness and calls for collective liberation and prosperity? How do we dismantle our privilege and notions of white saviorism while still showing up for issues such as climate breakdown, which have less impact where there is more wealth? Week 5 is engaged activism. How can we redefine sacred activism for this moment and embrace the political, ecological, and societal challenges within our understanding of and commitment to our spiritual practice? What does community organizing and activism look like when our sense of self is now so global and technological? And then finally, session 6, embodying all that we are. How do we embody a spirituality of wholeness and innate worth as we live in the complexity of now? What is all that we are? And so there'll be these main sessions where we'll have 3 speakers for each of these. And then later on in the week, we'll have an embodiment session. So we'll really have a chance to move through what has come up through the speaker sessions and open space for our own embodied wisdom to arise. And we'll also have salon sessions where we'll have some facilitated space, chance to connect with others in the group and discuss certain questions and themes that have arisen and share reflections. We have the most incredible faculty for this adventure. So we've called on people that have been on the podcast, many of our friends and community and people that we really respect and admire to come on this journey with us. And so during this inquiry, you will hear from Ada Paris, Alnor Lada, Charles Eisenstein, Claire Dubois, Erin Dixon, Reverend Jen Bailey, Jeremy Lent, Jyoti, Mac McCartney, Nazreen Sheikh, Brother Fap Lin, Nina Simons, Richard Rudd, Sally Kempton, Samantha Roddick, Swati Martin, Tiokasin Ghost Horse, and Uma Dinsmore Tooley. So all of these incredible people have been on the podcast before. And when you go to the page about this course on our website, You'll be able to actually click and listen back to all of their podcasts if you'd like to. For the embodiment sessions, we have Ava Reby Williams leading these, and she is incredible, and she's going to be on the podcast between now and then, so you'll get to know her a little bit deeper. And this dynamic between embodiment and personal and collective liberation. And then myself, Azadeh, Helly, and Charlie will be hosting the facilitated spaces and helping you through the journey just by creating that space. And so we would really love to welcome you on this journey with us from me to we. And it really is also a celebration of our new name and a celebration of all that we are, and a chance to dig into those really difficult questions that feel very alive at this time. If you'd like to join us on From Me to We, if you just go to our website, allthatweare.org, and click on courses, you'll then find a link to From Me to We. It's also in the show notes. And you can join us. We have a special discount for our members, those that have been part of Presence Collective, which is now kind of merging with the patrons into our membership. And we have an early bird offer on as well for the next week or so. And so please do join us for this journey. It really is going to be a powerful moment for this community to come together and really make sense of this time that we are living in. And now for my guest of this episode, I'd like to introduce you to Adrienne Maree Brown, who is the author of Grievers, which is the first in her novella series with the Black Dawn imprint. She is also the author of Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy, Facilitation, and Meditation, We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice, Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, and she's the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements. She's also the co-host of the How to Survive the End of the World and Octavia's Parables podcast. Adrienne is rooted in Durham, in the States. In this conversation entitled Microcosms of Liberation, Justice, and Pleasure, we explore the themes of future visioning, layered time, and grief, where we speak to the question, how can we imagine and practice freedom in this time of limitations? We recorded this conversation in the autumn, and it feels very relevant and apt today, as all these conversations do, as we experience ourselves in layered time. I hope that you enjoy this and that it opens up something for you. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Adrienne, thank you so much for coming and sharing some of your time with us here. I'm curious as to what a beautiful future means to you.
I think about the future all the time. When I imagine it beautiful, it's one in which everyone in it is able to feel their wholeness, feel the beauty of connection, feel their freedom, feel like there's nothing of themselves that they have to tuck away or hide because it's unacceptable to the rest of the world. I imagine a future in which we have eradicated cycles of harm. So we get to be with each other, not saying that we never make mistakes or have those moments of ouch, but that we're able to take accountability when that happens, and that we're not driven to oppress each other in harmful ways. That future that is absolutely stunning to me is one in which we have recovered right relationship with the planet. And we're really like welcome here, that we have found our place on earth.
Hmm. How important do you feel that visioning the future is to our way of being as humans?
I think it's perhaps one of the most fundamental practices that we have been gifted with and that we can engage in. Everything we experience in the world is something that was envisioned by someone else as a potential way of being. So I take nothing for granted. You know, when I look around the world, I'm like, yeah, this is this is what someone thought would be a great idea. And if we want something else to happen, then we have to be willing to get in and envision that. And then I think visioning also gives us something to shape towards. So once we have articulated that vision, then we can begin to move ourselves in a way that aligns ourselves with it behaviorally. So I think it's extremely important. And I think it's important to do both on our own and in relationship. We are fractal species. So I think that, you know, from the smallest to the largest, there are these patterns, these spirals that occur. And I think that humans are in that spiral pattern for our humanity, for our evolution. So I think it's actually very important what we do as individuals inside of the landscape of our own bodies and our own understanding of the world and our own growth patterns and relationships. What each of us practices at the scale of our individual lives is what is then possible for us at a large scale. I've said before, I have it on my wall, I'm a microcosm of all the possible liberation, justice, pleasure, and honesty in the universe, and I act accordingly. So I think that that imagination is in there. Then I think collectively imagining is also really beautiful and important practice, because we can be alongside each other because someone else told us that we are the same, instead of alongside each other because we actually share vision and we're trying to move towards a similar future. And I think that really matters. I think we run into a lot of pain and hardship because we make assumptions based on the constructs other people set up for us instead of actually co-visioning. I think it's very important.
I love that reminder of like the different levels to vision, that deep personal space of imagining and reimagining. And then as you're speaking, I can then see it, you know, like in all the different kind of key relationships in our lives, and then going out into our community and beyond and beyond. It's something that can often be part of like quote unquote work, and that then is forgotten when it comes to relationships. I know some couples that really sit down like every 3 months and they like create vision together, and then they renew and they review like every few months, and they have long-term and short-term vision, and it seems to be so powerful.
Yeah, I partner with anyone that I care about and love in visioning our future together. So my closest friendships are all friendships of vision. My beloved and I have vision for ourselves and the family that we're growing here. And to me, one of the markers of freedom, like one of the ways that we know each day that we actually have more and more freedom. And particularly as someone who my lineage is Black in the US. So it's from people who really did not have that freedom here in this place. That didn't mean that they didn't dream. That didn't mean they didn't have visions, but the distance between the life they were living and the visions that they had was so far as to sometimes maybe seem unimaginable. Now that distance is closer in a lot of ways. Like I have some days where I feel like I'm living inside of the visions I have had for the future, that I'm in relationship with people where we are honest and care for each other, and we're in mutuality, and we have abundance that we are creating with ourselves. And, you know, like we're just sort of spreading the resources we have around in a way that feels like enough, and we're learning what enough can be. And I'm like, that's remarkable. That's actually remarkable that I get to spend so much of my life inside of what feels like it could be a vision. It doesn't mean that there's a totality, because there's so much that's not aligned with that vision yet. There's so much that we're still pushing up against. But I can't deny also that proximity of vision is closer. And I think that matters. And I think that gets cultivated in relationship.
And so then if we're going to go into like the collective, and the world that we're living in right now is so far away from that beautiful future that you articulated, how does that vision move us from here? Or how do we embody that vision in a way that opens up creativity and also allows us to be present to where we are?
Well, a couple of thoughts occurred to me when you asked this, Amisha. One is, my dear friend Makani Thimba says freedom is a millisecond away, or we're a millisecond from freedom. And there's something about our ability to feel and see it, believe it, that actually makes it possible to leap towards it, leap into it. So I say that because there's moments where I'm like, oh, it's not that far away. It's just that we don't believe it enough to practice, to actually get into the practice. And so then, the distance is our belief and not any other measure. And then I think in terms of how to use vision in order to get ourselves closer to the future, I think there's so many ways. This is one of the reasons why I worship at the altar of Octavia E. Butler, who was a Black science fiction writer, because I think that she gave us so many visions of the future. And I call them compelling visions, because they weren't utopian necessarily. I have a whole concept of that utopia and dystopia tend to sit on top of each other. And for some to have utopia currently, others have to be living in a dystopia. It's one of the things that I'm often trying to imagine is like, is there something I could imagine in which everyone had access to the utopia? Maybe that's my limitation. But instead of thinking of utopia, I'm really drawn to compelling futures, by which I mean futures that we would want to be alive for, futures that we would still want to exist in. And what we have learned about our species over and over again is that even in the most dire circumstances, there's something in us that still moves towards life. But there are some lives that are so steeped in trauma that it's really hard to imagine why there would be a continuation. And then there's some lives that are so steeped in beauty and connection and love and family. And the difference between them is not those things you'd expect. It's not class, right? It's not that, the good, happy people have tons of money. In fact, I find it to be often the opposite, that those who have the most resources are the most bound to what others think of them and to constantly accumulating. And there's so much mental illness that comes from isolation, like deep isolation and constant competition. Because I think what we all long for is deep belonging, to know that we belong without question, that unconditional love. Having a vision for a future in which unconditional love is the norm and in which belonging is secure allows us to then think, what would I have to practice now in order to help manifest that future? So when I answer that question in my own life, one of the first things that came to mind was I'd have to stop lying all the time. I was lying about being satisfied by life I was lying in small talk. I was lying about what I really wanted. I was lying to participate in philanthropy. I was lying in all these different ways. Society really encourages us to be dishonest, and it's dishonest with us. So that was the first thing. So I was like, well, I have to be honest, because you can't get anything you actually want if you don't articulate it honestly. And I'd have to be vulnerable. Like, I'd have to let people know that I wanted things. And then I'd have to be willing to practice boundaries. That's, the key to being in community with others well, is being able to have great boundaries and great communication, and not just, melt together into one super organism, but to actually be in relationship. So my vision of a collective future shapes my choices in the here and now. And I have to say, after years of doing large scale movement work, I've really slowed down, because my vision is so massive But I had this recognition that in order to bring it to pass, I had to learn some skills at a much smaller, more intimate level. And I feel like now I'm in these relationships that feel much deeper, much more authentic, and much more aligned with the future I actually want to see than I necessarily had when I was engaged in much larger political projects. Maybe that's part of what COVID is pushing us towards. It's like actually being in practice at the scale we can handle of that depth of vulnerability and that depth of relationship and mutual aid that makes a different future actually become possible. But, I say this, you're always practicing something. So you're either practicing upholding the status quo and upholding the way the world currently is and upholding these constructs and these power dynamics, or you're practicing something beyond this, something with shared power, something with an abundant economy. I think vision shapes it very directly.
I really resonate with that, and also with what it's like to live with such big vision at times, especially in my 20s and my early 30s, that would very quickly lead to burnout. And then learning, like, how do you really shape a small part of that vision and trust that speaks to that bigger vision, rather than taking the whole thing on and taking on multiple complex systems and imagining somehow that you can dismantle them as one person.
As one person, it's ego. There's a lot of ego in the idea, like, I have to save the world and I have to save every community that's struggling. I recently was exposed to this quote, and I'm trying to think if I can remember the man's name now. It's Walter. I'll return to you if I can remember it, so you can throw it in the show notes, because I can't remember his name. But the quotes, it's this Ojibwe ancestor, and the quote of it was, the most European thing that exists is the idea that there's one way of doing everything. And I was like, oh, that's part of what shows up, I think, when we first started organizing and doing social justice work, particularly from a Western mindset, is we're going to save the world. Like, there's going to be one way to save it all. And I'm like, that's the same thought process that missionaries have and the colonizers have and the other, like, it's that process that there's one way that the world is supposed to work and that we're going to fix it that way. And it's a much more humbling process to imagine that there's many, many ways, a multitude of ways that people have to opt into something else themselves, and that they opt in for a number of reasons. Very few of them based in being shamed and guilted and facted into it, right? It's like, actually, stories are part of what makes us want to try something different, and seeing something compelling, like being like, that person actually looks happy. That person actually looks like well-rounded. That person looks like they made this journey somehow. They figured out a way towards freedom. I think of Harriet Tubman showing up to tell people, like, I know the way, I've been there, and how compelling that invitation is versus someone who's like, I think there's something over there. I don't know. I don't know. I'm like, oh, I'm going to follow the person who's like, I've been there. I made it and we can make it. And I'm like, I'm always in that practice of being like, well, how many of us can it's harder work, taking on the responsibility of actually being in practice versus being in a theoretical exploration of what practices are necessary. It's harder. And I think it's super necessary. I wish that all schools were structured this way, that all education was about what kind of human do you need to be to co-create a future, instead of what kind of standards do you need to reach in order to participate in the constructs of the present.
Absolutely. Because when I remember back to being like a teenager, and when you feel that disconnect, and I feel like it's really happening now as we're in like the tweens. I was doing an event for pioneers recently, and they were talking about tween times, and I was like, oh, okay, right. It's like back to that teenage disconnect where that everything is structured in a way that doesn't make sense, and you're being asked to comply with it, and it brings up a lot, which is what we all experience as a teenager. And then I remember coming into politics and organizing and campaigning and being told, like, this is how you do it, and you need to prove your worth, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And then that process of kind of unlearning all of that to be able to actually come back to that space of listening into my heart and listening to the future and allowing an embodiment to take place has really been something, and it's something that I still wouldn't even know how to articulate to someone else. In Emergent Strategy, you have done that.
I was like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess there's something that I'm contemplating at the moment around, well, the sort of dismantling of New Age spirituality. And there's an aspect within that where, it's about kind of creating your reality and like creating your reality, like your vision for your life. And often it's focused around making a certain amount of money and having certain kind of relationships and certain kind of houses and, your vision board and having all these kind of things.
Yes.
I'm curious as to what your reflection is on, like, what's like the subtle difference between that kind of visioning and the kind of visioning that we're talking about here for our compelling future?
One of the biggest pieces of it is the visioning around from the place of an I versus visioning from the place of a we. The visioning from the place of the I is like, it's all about what my success is going to be, my story, my brand, my impact on the world. And if a vision can easily move within capitalism without changing capitalism, without critiquing capitalism, then that's always a hint that it's not actually aligned with the planet, because capitalism is an extractive economic system that's not aligned with the planet. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces. Whereas I think what we're talking about, what I'm always trying to practice, is visioning in a we, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm not out of it. We includes me, as I am in relationship with the earth. I am in relationship with the community I'm a part of. I'm in relationship with all the people that I love and care about. And I'm in a relationship with all the people on the earth. This is the part that always messes me up, is if I could just choose, I'd be so good and it would be so easy. It's just like, oh, these 15 people, I love them. Like, I'm just really focusing on what we're up to. But visioning for the we, you quickly realize we're on actually quite a small planet. This is a finite physical location. And while we might have an infinite spiritual capacity, we have this finite planet and we have finite lives. We have lives where we are born and we definitely die. And so within that, it's like the fact that there are racists, the fact that there are patriarchs, the fact that there are billionaires who are hoarding their resources rather than pouring them into the collective, it's out of alignment with humans being able to be compatible on this earth, with this earth. So visions, to me, the act of collective visioning is saying, what is it going to take for we, the larger we, the whole, the species, to become compatible with the planet? It actually won't work if we don't. Right now, it's much more likely that it doesn't work out than that it does, based on our behavior and our patterns and other things. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that. Whenever you can recognize that something isn't working, then you can begin to turn and face and try something else. There's a time, maybe a few centuries ago, when people could be like, oh, this seems like fine. It'll just be fine if we just monocrop this area. It'll be great if we move in this way, or we extract from the earth in this way. And now we see that it doesn't work, that it's not working for the planet and that it's impacting the planet. Likewise, I think there was a time when it felt like capitalism was the only economic possibility. And now we see that it doesn't work. We thought that punishment and prisons were the only way to stop crime and harm, but they haven't worked. They haven't stopped it. So once you're in that situation, you're like, oh, that experiment has failed. We're still doing it, but we know it doesn't work. Then there's opportunity there. And I think our work is to be able to step into those moments and say, there's other possibilities. And not only do we think about them, but we've been practicing them. That's one of the things, if I have like a repeated, I'm like repetitive slogan or something, it's like practice, 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 practice. We can say everything we want to say, and we can even say things very much in alignment with the world we want to create. But what matters is what we practice. So I'm always thinking about that. I'm like, what am I practicing? What am I practicing in my love, in my family, in my community, with movements, right? What am I practicing as I become a more visible writer? What am I practicing that keeps me in accountability and alignment with the movements that I deeply believe in? I think we constantly have to be asking ourselves that question.
We are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more. I know you've taken some time this year to write your novella, and the title is Grievers, and I wonder what you can share about the role of grief in a dying culture.
Yes, I started working on Grievers in 2011. The idea, the story of it is that the person we're following, the main character is a Black genderqueer person named Dune. Dune's mother is patient zero of a mysterious syndrome that strikes, and it looks just like grief, and it spreads amongst all the Black people in Detroit. What I learned in the writing of it and the continued writing, because it's the first of a trilogy, it's this deep dive on grief. But one of the things I learned is that grief is necessary for us to understand and be in practice of for our evolution. Grief is a way that we ritualize and honor what we love and stay in a relationship with it. And learning how to grieve at the individual and communal level, I think, is going to help us prepare ourselves to grieve at the systemic level, because we have these massive systems that we are deeply embedded in and involved in and comforted by in a lot of ways, that we're also, I think, more and more of us coming to understand, like, this system cannot continue if we wish to continue as a species. So, the easiest example of it I can think of is, for many of us, the pandemic has been a time of a lot of deliveries, having things that we normally would have gone out and picked up ourselves, maybe delivered to our home, food and groceries and anything that was like, if I don't have to risk my life, then I'm not going to go outside. But somebody was going outside. Somebody was risking their lives for those things. And that is capitalism in a nutshell. It's like, someone will have the convenience, the luxury, and someone else will do the labor. As someone who has, like, my body has been going through changes, my abilities have been going through changes, it's been extremely wonderful to me to be able to just order things whenever I need them. And when I think about that not being possible, I'm like, wow, what will I do? How will I live without that? And isn't that the fundamental question of any grief? Right? Is, how will I live without that person that I adore, without that creature, that beloved one, that beloved place, that view, the way that the rain comes through this particular place? When I open wide into that, it's like, how would we live without Earth? How would we? How do we handle all of the species that are gone? Like, the grief is massive. There's something about grief that also lets us be responsible for being of this world. It's like, I was touched by this. Part of what I'm exploring in the book is, like, what are the rituals of grief that satisfy the loss, the need, like washing the bodies of the loved ones, burying them ourselves, cremating them ourselves. How much time do we need for that first wave of grief? and what comes after. Do we need community or solitude? Just trying to explore it all, learn it all, be in community. I'm in a community, I think we all are now, but in a community that's experienced a lot of loss. Well, I'm very grateful actually for the kinds of rituals that have been emerging in this time.
Can you share any of those rituals for our friends that may not be in such a rich community where there are rituals?
Well, one thing that I picked up from being in community was I was not raised with a lot of ritual around grief necessarily. My family did a lot of really beautiful things, but we were also very far. We grew up, my dad was in the military, and so we were moving all the time and we weren't really physically around a lot of spaces. And I remember going to like one funeral when I was a child of my grandmother, but it wasn't something that happened frequently. And there was a lot of mystery around, it's just like, okay, now you're just going to show up here. It's going to be like this. So as I got older, I was really moved when I would see people who had other practices. And one of them that really has just become such an ancestral gift is an ancestor altar. So one of these practices is that I have an ancestor altar. The one I have in this home is in my office, and the walls around it are covered in my ancestors, both of my lineage, but also those of the lineage of my work and my thinking, my ideas, those who have inspired me. And when someone passes, they join the ancestor altar. I light a candle for them and I remember them and I think about the impact of their lives. And I hope that they have a really good transition and that what's beyond is wonderful for them. So that's a ritual that I've picked up on. And so when I'm in community and someone tells me, like a good friend just texted me that her grandmother has crossed over, and I'm like, okay, I'm taking her and adding a candle. And some days there's multiple candles on the altar. Some days there's one, some days there's none. But that practice feels like one where even if I'm on my own, I'm in this interconnected community and I honor the ancestors of all my loved ones, not just my own. And then I'm part of a community called Pandemic Joy that a friend of mine whose wife passed away 3 years ago as the pandemic was starting was just like, I don't want to do this by myself. I can't do this by myself. I need community. And so we gather once a week and we sing to each other and we offer wisdom to each other. And we get a COVID report from actually the father of the wife who passed gives the COVID report. There's fellowship, there's celebration, there's joy. And we also honor the grief and what's hard in the world. And if anyone had told me, I grew up going to church and I hadn't done it in years. And if anyone had told me like once a week, you're going to gather with people and have this beautiful experience that is sacred, I don't know that would have made sense to me. But when the invitation came, I found that each week my spirit really wanted to be in that place and just be with other people who were not hiding our grief and not hiding our need for comfort and our need for each other. So those are two places, the ancestor altar. And then I think there's many ways anyone could create their version of a pandemic joy space, a space where you come together with people that you're in relation. I mean, everyone who's in the space is a friend of the person who started it. It's very intimate. And we need those kind of spaces where you can come and there's nothing to perform. People are often, on the Zoom call, like in their pajamas in bed. It's really sweet. So those practices I would offer up.
Yeah, something that you said around the coming together, like in the way of remembering that we need each other, hit with me, because I feel like in this social media culture and just in the dominant culture in general, there's this story of like proving yourself, whether it's like the coolness from like the movies that we all watched when we were younger or the characters that are shown in media, this kind of notion that like, you've got to be all right. And if you're not all right, like you should have done something about that differently. And it's your fault, and it's your bad. And you're bringing the party down or you're not taking responsibility for yourself. And I feel like the pandemic has really reminded us that that's all a load of bullshit. And it's still upheld within culture. Like, it's
Oh,
still
totally.
not acceptable to actually.
No, I love it. I'm just thinking of this meme, and it's so hard to ever be like, I'm going to try to tell a meme, but there's this meme. I think it's like my therapist is being like, so you recognize that everyone is going through a global pandemic and it's a total crisis and no one has it together and it's okay to completely fall apart. And you're like, right. And the therapist is not you, right? And you're like, right, not me though. Right. And it's just like, I feel like that, for me at least, I'm so used to being a high functioning individual. And this global pandemic has been such that even the high functioning individuals eventually have hit that wall where makes your system run even when you're empty and keep trying to perform and perform and perform. That part of you wears down and wears out. And I think the great gift of this time is recognizing that we all have those limitations. And I've said this for many years, but I think those who live with chronic illness, chronic pain, are often the carriers of the collective burden of grief and overwhelm and burnout. And it's not equally distributed. There's some whose way of processing is to just repress and push it down and keep going over it. That stuff that gets pushed down spills out as unkindness, spills out as toxic behavior, spills out in the form of harm, trickles down, trickles down, trickles down. And then I think there's then the class of people who are empathetic and compassionate, but catch so much that it's overwhelming. So I think the gift of this time has been, we're all feeling bodies that include minds, but they're not solely minds. And we all need room to emote and to process what's coming up. And right now, we're all in the same boat that there's more to process than we actually have capacity to hold. So the answer to that, I believe, is a large scale spiritual awakening, a large scale spiritual shift. Because my friend Angel Kyoto Williams said this to me years ago, and it really stuck with me, which was, we have had the technological advances that allow us to know more about what's happening in the world than we've ever known before. But we did not develop spiritually in order to be able to necessarily handle and process and hold all of that knowing. So it does any number of things to our systems, but many of us, it's completely overwhelming. And a lot of what I'm doing all the time is being able to learn how to see it all and figure out how much I can handle holding and how much I can handle being responsible for, how much I can actually carry. Some days is smaller, some days is quite large, but it's never that I can hold all of it. There's always a point of overwhelm, a point where it's like, it's actually too much. So then for me, I have gotten more and more practiced at bringing my gaze back down to what I can touch, who I can be in relationship with, what I can actually hold there. And it's really helped me navigate. The internet is such a beautiful space where so much connection happens. And it can also be a really confusing space in terms of figuring out which connections matter, which connections are even connections. I think we're often being told, like, you need to care about this person you've never met in a place you've never been, doing things you don't even understand. But you need to care about that more than your neighbor, more than your partner, more than your children. You need to put this first. I've been trying to do a different practice, which is, how can I love the whole, like really love the whole, and then really focus in on investing my time and my attention and my practice with those I can actually reach. It's become a spiritual practice for me to be like, there's a lot that I will never be able to touch and I can't fix and I can't save and I can't control. That's humbling, but it's also right sizing my spirit body into the one life. It's like, this is what I can do. And I touch a lot of people. I've reached a lot of people. The gift of being a writer is a lot of people can basically sit with you through a thought process in their own time and space. It's very intimate, but I won't be able to do it with everyone. And I can't actually save anyone. Like, when people say, I feel saved by your work or your book saved my life. I'm like, no, the ideas that flowed through me, that channeled through me, touched something in you because they're also your ideas. They're also ideas that wanted a home in you. and they will keep moving. If you articulate them and you share them, they'll keep going through you. They're not mine. I'm a prism. I'm a prism that is helping you to see something that's true. That's how I feel, about emergent strategy. I'm like, that's just true. I'm not arguing about it with anyone. Like, here's something true. So to tie it together, right? It's like, in the face of that overwhelm, we do need this spiritual practice. The spiritual practice is actually quite personal and small and relative, but it still keeps us tied into massive ideas that are moving through us. Emergent strategy is the biggest idea I know, and it moves through me, and it has an answer to everything that's happening out there. But I can't do emergent strategy to everyone. I can just share what I'm learning about it in my own little corner of life, and then other people will pick it up. That's how I learned it. That's how I've learned about mutual aid. That's how I've learned about ancestor work and shadow work. That's how I learned about potential new economies. It's all been relational learning, being in a space where someone was willing to slow down and teach me.
I really appreciate the reminder about chronic illnesses and holding. We hosted a retreat for this community in person and in a beautiful space in nature at the autumn equinox. And when I was reading the forms of everybody that was coming, and, it was so many like mystery illnesses, chronic illnesses, post-viral fatigue, something that I've struggled with a lot. Blood tests always fine, but like physically not always fine. And I feel like that can be seen as a weakness. And I really see that the people that are holding those illnesses, that fatigue, and still showing up, that's the strength and the courage and the beauty that is needed at this time. And it's beautiful, important work to be able to sit with and navigate through these kind of unknown, undiagnosable issues that manifest in the physical body. It's not a failure. It's not like, breaking away from this kind of new age idea that you've created this illness in you because you've got something unresolved, but that actually you're holding and processing something that so many,
for the whole.
Yeah. And that so many are not doing that work. And so it's heavy for those that are willing.
Yeah. They say matter doesn't disappear. I've been thinking lately that trauma doesn't either. Like, trauma doesn't disappear at a somatic level. We know this, that it stays in the body, and there's been great scholarship on it. You can read Bessel van der Kolk, and you can read about Gabor Mate and other people who really study trauma, but it doesn't go anywhere. So for some of us, it stays in the body. It just holds and it waits, to be discovered, to be welcomed, to be completed. But I think for others, it gets passed on, it gets handed over, it gets handed down. I always joke about this. I saw this somewhere that I go to therapy for those who don't,
Yeah.
right? It's like I've moved through my things, but now there's so much else. But I think the same thing happens in the body. It's like I carry trauma for those who don't, who won't. I turn and face trauma for those who are scared to look. Sometimes even I'm like, I cry for my ancestors who weren't allowed to. I take time and days where my body needs to lay down. And maybe that's because I have a great grandmother who needed that time. And one of my friends, Alexis Pauline Gums, talks about time traveling. And it's really opened up this idea in me that maybe we can gift energy across time. Maybe we can gift energy to those we can imagine. And I love imagining that, my grandmother, who was a domestic worker, who was on her feet a lot, sometimes I'll feel a pain. And I'm like, I'm in a position where I can go make a bath full of Epsom salt and sit in it and like relinquish that pain. And maybe I can relinquish some of hers as well. Or maybe there's some day that she was able to get through because of something I'm doing now. If time is not just this linear thing, but if it actually moves in many directions, if it's cycles, if it's, again, mysterious, then there's a lot more that becomes possible inside of it for what our actions mean, what we're up to. And I like the idea of layered time, that what I'm doing in this plane, in this moment of time, has reverberations beyond my comprehension, and that I can maybe shape those with my intentions. I'm always sending like energy back to Harriet. Just like, I don't know how you did it, but I just want to send you. It matters, energy. That what you're doing with these 4 people in the woods right now is going to matter more than you'll ever know to so many generations of people who are still trying to get free. even that, holding that hope sometimes is the thing. And people do show up. We keep showing up.
That is so beautiful. And speaking of time, unfortunately not the traveling kind, but the restraint that we have here.
I know.
We have to close in a moment, and I would love to invite you to share a little bit on the role of pleasure and your call to action for this moment that we're in.
I believe pleasure, which I define as happiness, satisfaction, and contentment. I believe that pleasure is something that we're all wired to experience, and we're meant to experience. It's part of how we balance every aspect of our lives. It's like that wiring is there to say yes, and you can feel good inside of this. You can feel satisfied. Any satisfaction we experience in our life helps to reprogram us in every aspect of our lives. So whether it's I was thirsty and I gave myself a drink of water, and the satisfaction of that can build a capacity to move towards what your body needs. And at a societal level, we deeply need to learn how to be satisfied. In our movement spaces, we need to know how to be satisfied and then be able to say, this is not satisfying. This is not satisfying us, right? Lately, one of my jokes for myself has been that I don't want a fake orgasm of a climate policy. Like, I don't want the unsatisfying version of any of the changes we actually need. I want the real thing. So I think the call to action for people in this moment is to look for what can you imagine, what pleasures can you imagine and practice into the apparent limitations of this time. How can you still understand your freedom in this time, and that you're free to be interdependent and interconnected? You're free to be vulnerable and to have needs and to state them. You are free to be in the deepest relationships of your life. How can you find the pleasure? I keep saying this, like, we're not on pause. There's no normal. The human condition, we just move forward, and we either evolve or sustain, evolve or sustain, evolve or sustain. And we've been sustaining some toxic things that are making it hard for us to evolve. I think pleasure is one of the ways we clear the system and create pathways for other things to come into space. So that's what I'm trying to do right now, is cultivate all the small and large pleasures in my system so that I can imagine health in my life, health in my community, and health for this planet.
Thank you. There's so much that I still want to share from some of the things that you've shared that's like spurring in my consciousness right now. But
good. I mean, that's good, because then it's going to like hook into your own comprehensions and understandings, and you'll take it to places that I could never imagine. Like, that's, to me, my mentor, Grace Lee Boggs, was such a fan of conversation for this reason, because you come to the conversation and you say whatever can fit inside the conversation. And then it's all seeds, and everyone is ground is going to grow different things with those seeds.
How would you like people to connect with you if they want to reach out after this conversation?
Yeah. I love for people to read Octavia's work, Octavia E. Butler's work. So that's, it's like, if you really want to connect with me, read her work first. You can read my books. All of them are at akpress.org. And then I'm on Instagram. That's like my social space where I post memes and songs and life. So that's the other space. My boundaries are very good these days. It's not very easy to directly connect with me. I'm saving all that time and space for my close circle right now. But those are the spaces where I'm available to the world.
I love that. I love that modeling of the boundaries and how you can be in wider community if you really honor your boundaries. So thank you for sharing that.
I'm Insta-social.
And thank you for everything that you've shared in your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate this conversation.
Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All that we are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.